President Trump is a genius. In this video, I'm going to lay out what he's doing in the big picture, not just in this war with Iran, but how this war with Iran fits into a much larger global strategy. Let me explain. Most Americans, especially those who believe in America First or MAGA, agree that the greatest existential threat to the United States from a foreign country isn't Iran. It's China, or to be more precise, it's the Chinese Communist Party. So when you see the United States fighting a war with Iran, your first thought might be, why are we getting involved in someone else's fight? This is Israel's war. This is a distraction from the main thing, and the main thing is dealing with the Chinese Communist Party. Now, that's fair, but here's the part that people are not talking about. For years, the Chinese Communist Party has treated Iran as part of a global network of influence. Okay, it's been a partner in oil and technology deals and in evading sanctions. In 2021, China signed a 25-year cooperation agreement with Tehran that was supposed to give the CCP guaranteed access to large quantities of Iranian oil at discounted prices in exchange for massive infrastructure investment by the CCP in Iran. Despite U.S. sanctions, these smaller Chinese refineries, they call them teapot refineries. They're basically semi-private refineries that are off the grid. They're the ones who have continued to import Iranian crude oil after disguising its origin, and sometimes labeling it as coming from Malaysia or the Emirates to avoid sanctions detection. Now, this partnership between the CCP and Iran gave cash flow to the Iranians, helped them stay afloat economically. And of course, it helped China keep its oil supply flowing outside of Western controls. And that's why the United States has been acting against this whole network of what we call shadow fleets or ghost fleets. These are tankers and shell companies that move illegal oil, sanctioned oil, to China by moving it around the world. Let me explain this. A few days before this war began, on February 23rd, the U.S. military boarded and seized an oil tanker called the Bertha in international waters near the Indian Ocean. They said that they had been tracking it from the Caribbean. And the headlines said that it was seized, quote, under Iran-related sanctions. So that obviously raises a question. How does a ship carrying oil from the Caribbean to the Indian Ocean end up tied to Iranian oil sanctions? Iran isn't in the Caribbean. So what's going on? So the Bertha was seized because it was part of an Iranian oil sanctions evasion network. Okay, this network is how the CCP gets around sanctions, and it buys Iranian and Venezuelan oil. Iran and Venezuela have, for many, many years, had a very extensive partnership. They've supported each other in this anti-U.S. alliance. They're both heavily sanctioned by the Americans, and they both were supplying large amounts of crude oil to China, although the quantity the Iranians were providing to China was about 4 or 5 times that provided by the Venezuelans. Now, under the Trump administration, the U.S. aggressively shut down Venezuela's sanctioned oil flows. And we know exactly what they did there, decapitating the Venezuelan regime and basically taking it over. But they also, even before that, were seizing oil tankers coming out of Venezuela, blocking shipments, and imposing their own legal control over millions of barrels of oil after taking Maduro out. The U.S. was sanctioning and blocking this whole Chinese network that was turning Iranian oil into a backdoor energy supply for Beijing. So let's keep this simple. In the run-up to the war in Iran, the U.S. was also cutting off other arms of the CCP axis, namely Venezuela, and the illegal sanctions evasion network through which the Iranians and Venezuelans were getting their oil to China. See, they move oil around the world. They move it to different places. They change it from tanker to tanker at sea. So the Iranians would ship oil to the Caribbean. It would get moved onto other ships, get mixed around, and then sent back. It was a complicated system that was designed to be complicated, kind of like laundering money. And the Trump administration has been cracking down on this whole system pretty much since they came into office. And that's why what the Trump administration did in Venezuela and in Iran now all fits into one coherent strategic pattern. Okay, these are not isolated events. One of the most important points that no one's talking about is this. China is not doing very much to defend Iran. Beijing has supported Iran diplomatically and economically for years, as we've talked about. They've now issued strongly worded statements condemning the U.S. and Israeli attacks. They're calling for a ceasefire, but they're not offering any real assistance. No offer of military intervention, no real support, no offer of restocking weaponry. Why? Because the CCP is not an ideological ally of the Iranians. The relationship between the CCP and Iran was purely transactional. It was purely economic. Beijing wants cheap energy. It wants markets. It wants influence without risk. But when the Iranian regime is under real military pressure, when it's under real threat, you see that the Chinese have backed off. And this tells us something very important. The CCP's grand strategic partnerships are not backed up by any real strategic commitments, meaning their partnerships are a matter of convenience for them until they get risky and then they bolt. And that exposes Xi Jinping's CCP as the paper tiger that it is. It has lots of rhetoric, but it's very cautious when things really get heated. And that has implications far beyond Iran. Here's the real strategic message of what's happening in the Middle East right now. When the United States uses force decisively, the rest of the world gets the message. America is still in charge. America still has the capacity and the will to act. America will not hesitate when it's threatened. And China is watching this very closely, especially when it comes to Taiwan. You see, the CCP has been trying to exploit what it perceives for years as American hesitation to act, hoping that the U.S. won't get involved militarily in big geopolitical fights. So they're constantly moving the goalposts and threatening a little bit more and doing some more maneuvers near Taiwan, taunting the Americans and being more and more aggressive gradually and testing the American resolve. The Iran war that's happening right now and the U.S. willingness to use devastating force sends a very clear message. America still has the will to act with military power. This, of course, has to make the CCP think twice about any aggressive moves on Taiwan because they know that the U.S. is not afraid to act kinetically. So that's how this conflict actually matters to Taiwan's safety. This war isn't just about Iran. It's not just about the Middle East. It's not just about Israel. What's happening is this. The Trump administration is systematically degrading the CCP's strategic levers in energy, in sanctions evasion, and in geopolitical influence. The Americans are disrupting Iran's oil revenues. They are reducing China's cheap energy imports. They're weakening China's sanction evasion system that it built over years. And it's cutting off financial support for anti-U.S. proxies. This is all sending a clear signal about U.S. resolve and willingness to act militarily. Let's sum all this up by looking at what everything I just said means going forward. What does it mean for the coming days, weeks, and months ahead? So at the end of this month, President Trump is scheduled to meet with Xi Jinping. This meeting is going to take place just after the U.S. has demonstrated three very important things. First of all, that China's energy lifelines, its illegal energy lifelines, are not untouchable. Between the American actions in Venezuela and what's going on now with Iran, these two regimes that were supplying China with discounted oil that were evading the sanction system, what it means is that China's access to cheap oil is no longer guaranteed. That's number one. Number two, China's strategic partnerships have been exposed as kind of empty. Iran signed this long-term agreement with Beijing. They talked about a strategic alliance against the West. And yet, when Iran came under pressure, China didn't show up. No military support, no intervention, just statements and pretty muted diplomatic complaints. Third, the United States has demonstrated that it still has the will to act militarily. For years, the CCP has been testing whether America has the stomach for this kind of hard power, whether they're going to hesitate, whether the United States has become risk averse. But what they just saw from the Trump administration proves just the opposite, both in Venezuela and in Iran. Xi will be looking at a United States that has just shown that it can and will reshape the geopolitical board in its favor. This has squeezed the CCP, it's squeezed its allies, and it's exposed the limits of Chinese influence and alliances. And this reminds the world, including Beijing, that American power is still very real. Trump has more leverage going into this meeting than he had before, and that's the real implication of this war that almost nobody is talking about.